Yes, hello and welcome to Planet America's Off the Planet with all the extra chatter and longer interviews. I'm John Barron.
And I'm a chattery Chas Licciardello.
Yes, you are.
Before we start, John,
Yes.
right off the top, we have some unfinished business, you and me.
Oh, yeah.
You promised a prediction after the election.
Sure.
So give us your election prediction.
First, a reminder, what was your prediction again?
My prediction, John, I'm glad you brought that up, was 52 Republican seats in the Senate and 195 Democratic seats in the House. So I was only 2 to 3 seats off in the Senate and 20 or so seats off in the House. Only.
Yeah, okay, well, I guess I'm prepared to make my prediction now.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I think it's highly likely that now that the Democrats have 50 Senate seats and a functioning majority, they will win the Georgia runoff election, where Herschel Walker will probably be dragged down further by the shenanigans of Donald Trump, and he won't have Governor Brian Kemp dragging him over the finish line. He finished, almost 7 points behind Brian Kemp?
He did.
So I think without Kemp, dispirited Republicans will just allow Raphael Warnock to win. So it'll be a 51-49 Senate. And in the House, look, I think on the basis of probability, it is still heading towards a narrow majority. So 435 members. Democrats are going to get 215 to the Republicans 220.
Okay, we've got you on the record now, John. Very brave predictions you're making there.
Thank you very much.
I've got to say, I suspect you'll be more accurate than mine. On that House result, it is, like you say, it is actually genuinely possible that the Democrats could actually win it. Like the situation is at the moment, we were being very official and ABC-like in the main show, but now we can be speculative and dodgy. According to the New York Times, Nate Cohen, their pollster, their poll guru, he's basically saying the way things are tracking, in reality, even though Republicans are leading 221 seats, he's saying 219 to 216 is the most likely outcome.
218 gets you to a majority.
That's right. So
magic number.
Yeah, so basically 2 seats more than one seat more than they need.
Yep.
218 to 217 is very much on the cards though. And if that's the case, the 218th is Lauren Boebert. The person who no one thought was in any danger whatsoever. She may be the person who decides the House.
Great.
And then
imagine her having the casting vote.
Well, then you have a situation where anyone defecting can change the balance of power in the House, which is, with 435 people, that is actually a real threat. Yes. Especially with some of these New York reps, some of them moderate.
And it's not just the very, very Trumpy MAGA election denying, to be frank, wingnuts like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But there is also a kind of 50 members of the Freedom Caucus, the old Tea Party crowd, who were impossible to wrangle for past speakers like poor old Paul Ryan and John Boehner. So it's not impossible that, in fact, there could be a functioning majority in the House brought about through Democrats and 40 or 50 moderate Republicans, because Republicans did make some gains in some traditional Democratic congressional districts. There wasn't a red wave in 48 states, but in Florida and New York, there kind of was, including 3 Democrat seats that were flipped on Long Island in New York, which Republicans have now gained, but they're very moderate Republicans who could potentially work with Democrats.
Yeah. And on that note, though, you mentioned that Florida and New York were the most successful areas for Republicans. That they have something else in common as well, which was their result was centred around court cases involving gerrymanders. In that the courts allowed Florida's gerrymander, but they did not allow New York's gerrymander. If you add up all the court cases involving gerrymanders in this election, you have 4 seats, I believe, actually, the Republicans took in New York, plus a potential 5th one is on the cards right now. 4 seats Ron DeSantis took in Florida from the gerrymander. On top of that, there was a court case in Maryland as well, which gained the Republicans 1 seat as well. And on top of that, there's a Supreme Court case recently basically handed Louisiana and Alabama 1 seat each from Republican gerrymanders as well. Add that up, that is 4 to 5 from New York, plus 4, 8 to 9, 10, 11, 12. So we're talking, 12 to 13 seats from court cases and gerrymanders. That's a massively taking care of the margin. It was this election was decided by court cases involving gerrymanders.
Yeah. Well, I guess, there's a lot of potentially decisive factors, including in New York. One of the reasons why Democrats underperformed there was abortion was not so much an issue, because in New York, abortion access is already guaranteed. And the assumption basically was the Democrats, even though Lee Zeldin ran a surprisingly strong gubernatorial campaign against Kathy Hochul, Democrats control the state house in New York. So they're not going to see abortion rights tossed out there. So therefore, abortion is off the agenda. What was on the agenda? Well, there was a lot of talk about crime in New York. And that resonated more than I think a lot of people realised. It got Zeldin into the contest, but it also got them that handful of congressional districts as well, where, yes, they're concerned about the economy, yes, they're concerned about crime, less worried about abortion.
There's a lot of talk about crime everywhere during the midterms, and I said, flummoxed a number of times, I don't know why this is hitting so hard when there isn't a crime wave. But there is in New York. It's the only place where there is a crime wave. There's like a 30% increase in crime over the last year or so in New York. So it's not surprising in hindsight that even though everyone was talking about crime during the election campaign, it didn't actually matter to votes anywhere apart from New York.
Yeah.
And the gerrymander helped. So just to draw a line under that, if court cases had gone the other way, the Democrats would have gained seats in the House.
Yeah,
not just not lost, they would have gained them, which is amazing. By the way, if you're wondering when this is going to all wrap up, don't keep on checking New York Times and 538 obsessively every second, because it's going to be weeks. Because over half the seats left over in California, they've only counted 60% of the vote there. It's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks, but we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Okay, so John, that's the result as it stands at the moment. How does what's just happened affect the Georgia runoff? You said that you thought that the coattails of Kemp, not having the coattails of Kemp will be enough to make sure that Warnock gets through. Historically, Republicans tend to win those runoffs in Georgia, but you think it doesn't matter. I mean, Warnock has raised a lot of money, which is going to help.
Yep.
Although there probably won't be as much money in this one now, will there?
Well,
because the Senate's already decided.
Well, yes, but who's going to be more motivated to donate now if you're a Republican supporter and even if we win Georgia, we still haven't got control of the Senate? Or you're a Democrat going, well, we want to put the icing on the cake, we want a victory lap, we want to put a nail in the coffin. So I suspect that the small dollar donations are going to be tilting towards the Democrats. Republicans are getting all tangled up around Trump v DeSantis being basically on from day one, and also trying to work out what do we do in the House if we have a majority there. So there's going to be a very difficult couple of weeks, but whatever Trump is reminding voters of himself, and Herschel Walker, he was not a great candidate, and he is no better a candidate now in a runoff. So I strongly suspect that he'll lose that. And one thing I would add as well is that now that they can focus in on that race without so many of the national implications. Control of the Senate is not at stake. It was in January last year when they had their last runoff. It could well be that they really will finally focus down on candidate quality, because it is still a bit remarkable that the pastor from Ebenezer Baptist Church was only just beating the spousal abuser, the two-time abortion coercing, multi-personality, Russian roulette playing, never been a politician, Herschel Walker, Trump's best mate.
Who didn't live in Georgia.
Didn't live in Georgia, and there was less than 1 point between them. That was remarkable. If I was going to make a go out on the limb prediction, and why not, I would say that actually it could be a little bit of a blowout for Raphael Warnock.
We'll save your prediction until after the runoffs happen. I do agree with you, though. This is my second prediction. I think also that Herschel Walker's entire candidacy throughout was wrapped around winning the Senate. Like, do you remember Dana Lash's famous grab about how she would vote for Walker even if he'd tortured baby eagles? She just wants the Senate.
Right.
Well, now she's not getting the Senate.
Right.
So what's the point?
Yeah.
So I do feel like that Walker's lost a lot of his reason to exist. Now that you can't win
It will
Senate.
potentially be a clue, though, if Republicans do just go, you know what, if Mitch McConnell, for instance, he can put tens of millions of dollars into this race if he wants to, or he can just go, you know what, let's write it off and try again next time. And that'll be a really interesting indication, because right now, Herschel Walker is a proxy for Trump. And if the McConnell wing of the Republican Party wants to further repudiate Donald Trump, the other way they can do it is to say, well, we're not spending a dime on this guy.
McConnell has his own issues, which we're going to get to in a little bit. All I would say is that that Kemp has given Walker his get out the vote operations, which obviously were quite effective because he got out the vote. So that might help. But whatever, I still think Walker, I agree with you, Walker's, I think, is going down. But we'll see. How does this result affect Biden now? Because the drums were beating about Biden very strongly in the middle of the year. Even just before the election, they were starting to beat again. This was an unexpectedly positive result for him. Does that mean he's just cruising to the Democrat nomination now? And how does he spend the next 2 years?
One thing that didn't change this week was that Joe Biden didn't get any younger. He got 1 week closer to his 80th birthday later this month. Democrats can reassure themselves by saying, well, this is great, and even though he wasn't particularly popular, he got up there and he said this is about saving democracy, and while ever Trump is lurking, that is definitely Joe Biden's point of difference. It was his rationale for running in 2020 was to beat Donald Trump, and he thought he was the guy to do it, and he was proven right. But whether Joe Biden now is still that guy, whether Donald Trump is still going to be the nominee. If Ron DeSantis looks like he's emerging as, if in a month from now, there's an open and shut case, an indictment against Donald Trump that says this guy's not even going to be allowed to be president again. He will have been convicted of a crime and unable to hold federal office. Joe Biden running against Ron DeSantis suddenly looks very dangerous for Democrats. And at that point, there will be massive pressure from the Democratic Party to say, Joe, go out a winner. You did what you said you'd do. You beat Donald Trump. You got a bunch of legislation passed, and then you saved the furniture in the midterms. You did wonderfully well. It's all downhill from here for Joe Biden. So I suspect that the reality of his age is going to keep gnawing away. But I can see a scenario where Joe Biden, instead of announcing, as he's indicated, maybe in January or February next year, whether he's running again, whether he announces, yes, he's running again early next year or not, I think there's still a window possibly at the very end of next year or even into early 2024 where he does an LBJ and says, I shall not seek nor shall I accept the nomination of my party.
It'd be a bit late then, wouldn't it?
Well, that's if he wants to hand the keys straight over to Vice President Harris. In which case there is no time for a competitive primary, or the Democratic Party can change their rules. They're already looking at changing up their primary schedule, not having Iowa and New Hampshire come first. The Democrats can start their primary in April or May of next year if they want to. They can have 4 Super Tuesdays and get the whole thing decided in a month between Kamala Harris and 5 other people if they want to. They can do whatever they please.
Yeah, that's true.
So there are some options open for them right now, but I think it's wishful thinking on the Democrats' side to think that Joe Biden is their best bet because, yes, he beat Trump once, but they're both older now, but Biden looks older.
I would say, I think the point you made right at the top there about DeSantis is absolutely true. If Ron DeSantis becomes the Republican nominee, Joe Biden cannot run against him. Like Ron DeSantis, he's got this young family, athletic, all the rest of it. Joe Biden looks so bad against Ron DeSantis. I just don't think that's viable at all. I think Joe Biden's only viable against Trump myself. But in terms of what the next... I think what this does is this buys them a little bit of time. I think if the Democrats have been blown out, I think people would be saying, okay, Biden, are you running or not? Like they'd be trying to push him out, basically out the door. This gives them some breathing room at the very least to wait till the beginning of next year, see how the economy's going, because all the economists are saying there's a recession coming. Is there a recession coming? What's the situation? I think it gives them a bit of time to sit back and just have a look. To maybe deal with this debt ceiling standoff, which is certainly coming. And that could define the 2024 election if America goes into default. So that gives him a bit of a chance to sit back and just see where that goes, which I think he'll take. But then after that, I mean, God, who knows? I think there's a lot of Democrats feeling really good at the moment, understandably, because they've overperformed expectations. But if the Republicans take the House by one seat, the Democrats are still facing the same headwinds they would have faced even if it was a blowout. There'll still be the investigations. There still will be no legislation and no budgets. There'll still be the threat of the debt default. There'll still be potentially impeachments. They're all coming, regardless. And then they feel great now, but I'll tell you what the age does. I don't think being 80 or 81 or whatever is a problem in itself. But whenever you have a down, people go, well, that's it, you're out. It's like the cricketers. Whenever the cricketer's 35 and they run into poor form, people go, you're out of here. Aaron Finch, go.
Yep.
You know, I don't think Aaron Finch would like to be compared to Joe Biden, but that's the problem. And if he has a downer in the middle of 2023, his approval ratings will just go through the floor because people go, he's finished now.
Yeah. Although
that's
ironically for Joe Biden, and this could be something that people that feel protective towards him, his family might sort of say, if on the other hand, Joe Biden declares mission accomplished and serves out the final 2 years or 18 months of his presidency as almost a post-partisan figure. I came along to save the country, Gerald Ford style, almost above politics. His approval ratings will go way up, just as Reagan's did late in his second term after Iran-Contra, because people get nostalgic and they go, oh, I like the old guy. I'm glad he's not running again, but I quite like the old guy. And I can see the temptation that, I mean, on the one hand, Biden knows, you know, he can become a lame duck. Well, in a sense, he is now, in a legislative sense, he is a lame duck. If they don't have the House, he cannot legislate. And he certainly won't do big legislation.
Might even get a budget.
Right.
Yeah.
They'll probably find a way just to keep the show on the road. It does offer the possibility for the history-minded of doing what Harry Truman did in 1948, running against the Congress. He was very unpopular heading into 48. He was expected to lose to Tom Dewey. But Harry Truman went out there and said, this do-nothing Congress, we need to do something about it. He ran against Congress, including members of his own party in Congress, the Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, who were getting in the way. And Harry Truman was able to win a second term as a result of that. So Biden could be thinking about that, but you've got to come back to the fact that he will be 82 just after Election Day in 2024. Is he really going to be serving as President of the United States, one of the most demanding jobs in the world, at the age of 86?
I'll tell you now, the Senate's not going to be a problem for him, because, especially if it's 51, because people go, well, there's two people who create problems in the Senate, which is Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Kirsten Sinema is going to be a meek little kitten because she's up in 2024. She knows she's getting primaried, so she's going to be extremely well behaved over the next 2 years. So one seat is all they're going to need from a margin to get whatever they want through the Senate.
Federal judges, that's what's going to happen.
Obviously, the topic which everyone's talking about at the moment, though, is Trump and DeSantis. You've already brought up DeSantis. There was a poll that just came out last night, which we were talking about off air. A YouGov poll, 42% of Republicans supporting DeSantis to 35% supporting Trump. In mid-October, the same people ran a poll and they had Trump 45 to DeSantis 35. So it's been quite a swing in about a month. Only 413 people sampled, so that's a very small poll. I would not rely on that at all, and this is obviously Trump's low point. Well, maybe not. Trump hopes this is his low point at the moment, so we'll see how it goes. What are your thoughts on that? Is Trump's race over before it begins?
No, it's not. History does suggest, though, that the early front runners in the primaries on both sides are often very vulnerable. You know, we can look back into recent history. You look at Scott Walker was, you know, he was going to be the nominee. Rick Perry was going to be the nominee. Jeb Bush. Now, obviously, Trump is not a conventional candidate. He's not going to bore people in the way that Scott Walker or Jeb Bush tended to do.
Is Trump the front runner, though?
Well, you know, look. Based on, and early polls are really about name recognition, which is why it's either Trump or DeSantis when most people respond right now. They don't know about Larry Hogan or Nikki Haley, or they know Mike Pence, but they've only ever seen Mike Pence as a governor in Indiana and a member of Congress, and as a vice president who kept a very, very low profile because the boss didn't like anyone else getting the spotlight. So, you know, I think it's way too early but, you know, the big question with Trump is, assuming he's facing criminal indictment from the Justice Department over his mishandling of official documents, that could be just simply disqualifying. there's a bunch of other cases that are still swirling around that could put him in significant legal jeopardy. So Ron DeSantis does suddenly look like a safe pair of hands.
On the legals, I promise you, none of those cases will be resolved before 2024, even if he's indicted tomorrow.
But if they're all hanging over his head,
Yeah.
if backing Trump in the primaries means even if he makes it to election day, even if he's sworn in as president again, it won't be a reasonably sensible, chastened Donald Trump.
No, it won't.
It will be Trump unchained. It will be Trump looking for payback. It will be potential gross abuses of his power as president. It'll be impeachment all over again, a third or fourth impeachment. I mean, do they really want to get back on the crazy train? That's the question.
I think Trump's biggest problem at the moment, and this is why he's tweeting or truthing such ridiculous things at the moment, is on this particular occasion, is that he really doesn't want to be tarred as a loser. Like, you can get away with a lot of things as a Republican. You can incite a riot, but you can't be a loser. Like, now those at home might say, well, he's lost heaps of times. But in 2018, it was Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan's fault. It wasn't his fault. 2020 didn't lose at all. He won triumphantly, but Biden cheated.
In a landslide. He won in a landslide.
That's right. And this time, we'll get to this in a second, it's not his fault. It's everyone else's fault. So the fact that Republicans are trying to tie him with this loss right now, well, this not as big a victory as they wanted right now, that is a problem to him. And it's also his personal nightmare, being tarred as a loser as well, I might add. But yeah, that once again is his reason for being, to win.
Yes.
Yeah, like you'll be tired of winning, etc. So this is why he's truthing out stuff like, while in certain ways yesterday's election was somewhat disappointing, from my personal standpoint, it was a very big victory. 219 wins and 16 losses in the general. Who has ever done better than that? Of course, only about a dozen of those races were actually competitive, and he lost almost all of them. But that aside, that's why he's doing that, because he needs to spin as hard as possible. I am not a loser. If that takes, then he's got a problem. So before we go a little bit more into Trump DeSantis, is he responsible for the loss? Like, there are people who are trying to blame him completely.
Sure.
Do you blame him completely?
No, and in a sense, I don't blame Trump at all, because I subscribe to the theory that Donald Trump didn't start the fire. The same populist conservative wave that began with the Tea Party movement in 2010, that saw even before that, the first embers were burning with the nomination of Sarah Palin as John McCain's vice president's running mate in 2008. That kind of ignorant populism that somehow motivated this fanatical base support, including from people who had not voted Republican or not voted at all for a very long time. The fact that we saw the candidates coming up through the early 2010s, the Michelle Bachmans, the Herman Cains, God rest his soul, before Trump came along. So that movement is there. It is an extreme movement. It is an anti-government movement, anti-taxation movement, anti-abortion movement with a kind of a pretty wacky take on religion and morality. So that existed anyway. But look, in a sense, you can say, you look at all of the issues that seem to have resonated with voters, and they all come back to Trump. Because even abortion obviously comes back to Trump, because Trump appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices that said they wouldn't repeal Roe versus Wade, and then they did repeal Roe versus Wade. So you can blame Trump for abortion even being an issue. You can certainly blame Trump for the survival of democracy being an issue after January 6th and his chaotic and convention-breaching presidency. So you can certainly slate a lot of these motivating factors back to Trump. But the fact is, Trump is resonating with tens of millions of voters, and take him out of the equation, then it comes down to, well, does DeSantis inherit that crowd, or do they just sort of become disillusioned again and become non-voters again? I don't know what happens to those people.
I think you make an excellent point about the fact that the crazy train took off from the station long before Trump jumped on board.
Sure.
Like, if the crazy train's going from Melbourne to Cairns, Trump's standing at Ipswich Station.
Yeah, right.
Like the crazy train took off a long time ago.
Yeah. Except we don't know how far the crazy train is going to go.
That is true. That is true. And the fact is, I in the show, I took a considerable amount of time to talk about the poor candidates interacting with the issues of the election to create this loss. The poor candidates being in swing states and swing districts in particular. Those people had to vote for those poor candidates. Like, it's not like Trump parachuted them in. Trump just gave them a tick, and then people had to vote for them.
Yeah.
And so I think people should take responsibility for their own decisions. I think that this whole, it's all Trump's fault, smacks to me of voters and Republican elites trying to wash their hands of the stink of a defeat and try and blame Trump. And in particular, elites who never liked Trump in the first place and have only been putting up with him for ages, seeing a convenient opportunity to try and get rid of Trump at this moment. So, because they've been trying to get rid of him for ages, but they knew they were sort of prisoners of the base, and then trying to take advantage of this to try and put the stink on Trump. Yeah, that's what it rigs up.
One thing as well, and I haven't seen any data around this to support it, but I just wonder, with Mehmet Oz underperforming in Pennsylvania, there are a number of those exit polls that we talked about during the week that said there are some of the values. Does he share our values?
Yep.
Does he, does he fit in with, does he understand people like me, et cetera, et cetera?
Has he lived long enough in the state?
Right. Yeah. There was a sense of otherness.
Yeah.
Now, Mehmet Oz was running to become the first Muslim senator.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, of course, was the site of one of the hijacked aircraft being shot down on 9/11.
Yeah.
I don't know that there isn't some little anti-Muslim factor here that may have added to this perception of otherness, in the same way as there was always this sense of otherness around some of the critiques of Barack Obama, including the birtherist stuff that Trump himself was promoting. Some of that was a proxy for race. They'd talk about him being a socialist or different to us, or not. Then it was like he's not a Christian or whatever it was. It was all about finding a way to express this person is just a little bit different. And I do wonder with Mehmet Oz, even though he talked about, drinking tequila with his crudités, whether that sense of otherness, yes, it was literally discussed about where he lived or how many homes he had, how rich he was, whether he was a snake oil salesman. But I just wonder whether there was just an issue there around religion because, well, America has never elected a Muslim senator, and I just wonder if there's just a little bit of a collective memory around that, particularly in a state like Pennsylvania where people died on 9/11.
Look, we can't know for sure, obviously. I think there'll be intensive polling about that over the journey. We might look back on this in 6 months with more information. Yeah. But all I would say is two things. The first of which is, like, as the Republican whisperer on this show, I feel like the issues with bigotry in the Republican Party are more cultural than religious per se. Like in that I feel like being gay is not a problem if you're a Republican, as long as you don't, inverted commas, act gay. Mm-hmm. Like and being Muslim is not a problem unless you, inverted commas, act Muslim. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Dr. Oz was the least culturally Islamic person you could possibly have. Like, he certainly wasn't, there's no way you'd know unless you were told, right? And so I feel like it'd be unlikely for that to be a problem with Republicans. But also, since I lurk in the worst parts of the internet, I can tell you...
Well, not the worst.
Pretty close. I can tell you that I haven't seen any indication of that. And I've seen no shortage of bigotry about, say, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, from parts of the internet. I've seen none of that with Dr. Oz. I mean, they hate him, but not for those reasons. They think he's a fake. They don't think he's a real conservative. Right? So, I mean, look, but you don't know. You just can't know.
No, we don't know how much anti-Mormon bigotry affected Mitt Romney's standing within the Republican Party.
There was some apparent bigotry online for that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I should say on the blaming Trump thing though, that right now, under the surface a little bit, once again doing a Republican whispering here, is a concerted attempt to blame Mitch McConnell for this loss, not Trump. And that is, unsurprisingly, from the people who support Donald Trump. Essentially, and the reason why you might go, how do you blame Mitch McConnell for this? It's because, in particular, Mitch McConnell, he runs the biggest super PAC funding a lot of these candidates, which is the Senate Leadership Fund. And he gave an enormous amount of money, like $230 million during his campaign, to various candidates. Yeah. He gave almost nothing to Blake Masters in Arizona. And The Trumpy types are really angry about that, in particular because he gave $6 million that he was going to give to Blake Masters. He took off Blake Masters and gave it to Lisa Murkowski, who's running against another Republican in Alaska. Yeah. And in particular, she ran against a Republican who the Republicans wanted to run instead of her, Kelly Tshibaka. So they're like, hang on, you're putting $6 million in a race against another Republican? And he also put $1.25 million to Joe O'Dea, who's a moderate.
But how much had Peter Thiel put into Blake Masters' race?
That's a great question.
Point? Because McConnell could rightly say, well, I don't need to put that $6 million into Arizona because Peter Thiel already put 40, 41...
$53 million.
$53 million.
So,
well, there you go. I mean, if $53 million is not going to win it for Blake Masters, then $59 million is probably not going to win it for him either.
Exactly. As far as super PACs go, they were matched up, Kelly and Masters. Kelly raised personally a heap more money. He raised, I think it was $75 million to Blake Masters raising $9. So there was a difference there. But once again, the $6 million was not going to make a big difference. The fact is, Blake Masters was a terrible candidate.
He was.
There's a reason he didn't raise any money himself.
Remind us how terrible Blake Masters was.
I'll tell you how. There's a clip which I cannot believe that, Democrats used it. I can't believe that hasn't been used more.
Yeah.
That on radio he was asked about subversive thinkers that were underrated. He cited the Unabomber.
Subversive thinker that's underrated?
Yeah.
I'll probably get in trouble for saying this.
Nah,
I'd say, how about like Theodore Kaczynski?
Good one. Actually, yeah.
Probably not great to be talking about Unabomber while campaigning.
The Unabomber, John. He's a terrible candidate.
Yeah, but like Trump, he says the quiet bit out loud. It's like he actually believes that. And he's telling the truth.
By the way, Trump had his own super PAC, which had $160 million, and he gave $3 million to Blake Masters. Oh, he also arranged a website which was raising money for both jointly, Trump and Masters, but in the fine print, which you couldn't see unless you clicked a bunch of different links, it turned out that 99% was going to Trump and 1% was going to Blake Masters. That's real. Honestly, that's real. Amazing. So that's what Trump did, and they're trying. And Trump's already on board. He said. Blake Masters blamed Mitch McConnell specifically. The people who control the purse strings, Mitch McConnell, decided to spend millions of dollars attacking a fellow Republican in Alaska instead of helping me defeat Senator Mark Kelly. And Trump then followed up with, this is a scam and voter fraud, no different than stuffing the ballot boxes. They stole the electron, I think he means election, from Blake Masters, do election over again. So Trump's trying to make this about Mitch McConnell to obviously get the stink off him and to blame Mitch McConnell.
And also to make a lot more money.
Yeah, well,
his cut of any future donations if they were to do a rerun in Arizona.
That's true as well. But anyway, regardless...
Kelly won by 6 points. So you could also justify McConnell's choice by saying, hey, we want to put money where it's going to make a difference.
Of course. And Mitch McConnell put so much money, and Trump put in so little money. Like, I've got the numbers here. McConnell put $38 million into Georgia. Trump put $3 million. Nevada, and by the way, they had almost the same amount of money in their super PACs. McConnell put $26 million in Nevada. Trump put $2 million. McConnell put $32 million in Ohio. Trump put $2 million. McConnell put $52 million into Dr. Oz, who was Trump's candidate. Trump put $3 million into that. So it's a bit rich for people to blame Mitch McConnell for this. He's doing his best, and Trump only spent $15 million out of his $177 million super PAC. So it's ridiculous, but it might work. Marco Rubio has postponed the Senate, has put out a letter asking to postpone the Senate leadership vote, and it's pretty obvious what the subtext is there. He said, first we need to make sure that those who want to lead us are genuinely committed to fighting for the priorities and values of the working Americans of every background who gave us big wins in states like Florida. It's a shot across the bow. Yeah. So it might work. It might work.
The leadership elections, including the House leadership elections, are currently slated to take place at or about the same time that Trump is announcing he's running in 2024 on Wednesday afternoon, our time. So that's going to be a test of loyalty.
Now, I know we've got to get to our interviews, but I just want to say one little thing before we do, and you might want to comment on this. Sure. And that is that I don't want to go too early on the Trump versus DeSantis thing, because DeSantis hasn't even declared yet. Trump probably is going to. A lot can happen. As like I said before, this is a low point for Trump potentially, all right? But I feel like it's not a coincidence that all the Murdoch outlets have gone at once. And the base and the Murdoch outlets never liked Trump in the first place. Back in 2016, they weren't pushing him. They came on board when the base gave them no choice. The base has always been Trump's source of power. I see no reason why the base wouldn't have been turned off by January 6th, but they will be turned off by an election which Trump had nothing directly to do with at all. That seems weird to me, I think, and unlikely. The base have basically anointed him as being appointed by Jesus. That sounds like I'm being silly, but honestly, I lurk in those parts of the internet. They're not going to be put off by something as trivial as this. And if the base the base is bigger than the New York part of the Republican Party. If the base doesn't change their mind, they're going to turn on the New York side. They'll turn on Fox News. They'll go, hang on, you guys are all just city slickers.
Yep.
Like I've seen very few people from the South say anything against Donald Trump during this last few days. There's been a few, but they're the more elite side. So to me, I'm not saying Trump's home. I'm just saying those who look at the polls and go, Fox News is talking Ron DeSantis. It hasn't begun yet. It really hasn't.
Yeah. Look, I think you're right. And don't be shocked if in 6 months' time, if DeSantis has fizzed. And bear in mind, Ron DeSantis was a member of Congress and a mediocre one at best. He was not seen as a strong candidate for Florida governor. Trump is right to say, I basically made you. DeSantis, his advertising pitches were all about Trump. And it got him elected in Florida. Now he says, I don't need you anymore. I'm going to do what you do, but better. Well, maybe he can do it, but also, he's solid enough. But when Trump, attacked him, we saw during the show, saying that he was a kind of an average governor. Well, yeah. I mean, you actually look at Ron DeSantis and you go, this guy is competent when he was responding to the hurricanes and everything else. He was saying the things that a governor or a president should even say. He was being a responsible commander-in-chief. But he wasn't setting the world on fire. He wasn't exciting. He wasn't going to make for great television. On a debate stage with Donald Trump, he's look, maybe he can learn to counterpunch. But I suspect he's going to be standing there just a little bit sort of, flat-footed like Jeb Bush.
He did look a bit robotic at times when he was debating Charlie Crist. I should just say he is exciting to Republicans on the culture war. Like he fights the culture war well, and Republicans like that.
Yeah, right.
So we'll see. We'll see. I agree. He's not as charismatic as Donald Trump and all the rest of it. But
maybe his argument isn't simply anti-Trump. It's, look, we all love Donald Trump, but unfortunately, given the baggage that he's got and the criminal indictments and everything else, I don't think he can win.
Yeah.
With me, you get Donald Trump without the indictments.
That'll be his argument. He would go, look, Trump won by 3.5% in Florida. I won by 20%.
Right.
Write your own ticket there.
Yep.
Let's all just not forget as well, there is one other person potentially in the mix.
My grandfather voted for the first man of color to be re-elected as president of the United States. I wish he had lived long enough to see perhaps another man of color elected president of the United States.
Now, Republicans are never going to nominate him, but if they did, no one would beat him in the general election. I promise you.
Interesting. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Now, we did in the program speak to Bill Kristol, long-time never Trumper, but he's got mixed feelings about both Trump now, but also DeSantis, and where this election leaves the Republican Party, which he is no longer a member of, but would like to become. He's still a conservative, after all. So here's more from Bill Kristol. What will this mean for the likely incoming Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, having a very small House majority rather than the maybe 25, 30, 35 that he was expecting?
Nancy Pelosi led a caucus with a very narrow majority the last 2 years, but she had been doing that for quite a long time, and she's extremely skilled at it. And everyone, I think the Democrats felt they had to pull together to support the Biden administration after 4 years of Trump. McCarthy has none of those advantages. He'll have people wanting to make a statement from the right, and maybe a few centrists who will resist people making a statement from the right. So I don't envy Kevin McCarthy his job. And he'll have Donald Trump on the outside butting in and complaining and agitating for much more aggressive investigations of the Justice Department or whatever. So I think it will be very tough for McCarthy in a certain way. I mean, Biden would obviously prefer to have a Democratic House because then he could pass legislation. But since he's passed quite a lot already, I wonder if deep down he's okay with having a narrow House, a Republican majority in the House, a narrow Republican majority in the House as kind of a foil. In a way, Biden got the best of both worlds. He has a Democratic Senate, and the way it works over here, obviously, the Senate confirms appointments, confirms judges, is more important in foreign policy than the House. And so Biden can govern reasonably well. He can't pass massive domestic policy legislation, presumably, but there wasn't that much really on his plate to pass. He needs to get us through inflation and so forth, but no huge legislative agenda. So not having the House from a policy point of view isn't that bad. And McCarthy having a narrow majority in the House from a political point of view could be very good for Biden and the Democrats. They'll look extreme, sort of chaotic, disorganized. And so in a way, the contrast might shape up pretty well for the Democrats going into 2024.
Finally, Bill Kristol, of all the states where Democrats overperformed expectations last week, it was the ones where literally abortion was on the ballot, where there were ballot measures in places like Michigan. What does that mean for the Republican Party going forward? How potent an issue will abortion rights be through 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, I think abortion is a challenge for Republicans because part of the party does not want them to moderate. Part of the party wants them to hang tough. It's a matter of principle. They strongly believe in the pro-life cause. And other Republican politicians are looking at these results and thinking, gee, we have to find a kind of middle ground on abortion. But, again, saying that is different from getting there. And in a Republican primary, it may still be the case that the stronger pro-life candidates have an advantage against the ones who want to moderate. So it's funny, on these cultural and social issues, the conventional wisdom has been for quite a while that they help the Republicans. The Democrats are the ones who look anti-police, they look radical, they look woke, they look hostile to parents, having a say about their kids' education, all these things. Some of them maybe a little true, some of them, many of them kind of caricatures. But Republicans have enjoyed very much playing the culture war cards. It's an irony that abortion, which in a way has been at the center of those debates for decades, but now is a real issue, a real policy, maybe was one of the things, certainly on Tuesday, that really came back to hurt the Republicans and remains a big challenge for them going forward.
Now, in the interest of balance as well, we didn't just speak to Bill Kristol, we spoke to Elaine Kmark, who worked in the Clinton White House, worked with Al Gore.
In the interest of balance, they agree on a lot of things.
Yeah, well, I suppose that is.
Go on.
Well, partisan balance, if not substantive balance. Either way, Elaine Kmark had some interesting things to say, particularly about the importance of abortion as an issue in the midterm elections, but also the future of her party as well, and where that might leave Joe Biden in 2024. Elaine Kmark. Elaine Kmark, welcome back to Planet America.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Whether particular issue-based polls were misinterpreted or not, Elaine, there were certainly just some head-to-head state, particularly Senate polls that were way out. What's going on there at that state level?
Yeah, I think the state-based polls probably it's just because their samples are too small. These state-based polls, they have extremely small samples, sometimes as small as 600, and you really get a lot of error in the state-based polls. I'll tell you what this is really a reflection of, is a broader problem, which is because so many local newspapers have gone out of business and you don't have local political reporters anymore in a country as populous, I was going to say as big, but as populous as our country, the politicians and the pundits, they talk past each other. There's no local reporter on the ground saying, oh, this is working and this isn't, because I've been to 16 rallies with this Senate candidate and I can tell you what people are saying and how the audiences are. And I think that means that everybody nationalizes everything. We lose the variation between states and between regions. And I think that everybody's off because of it.
And Elaine, over the last month or so, when a lot of polls had Republican candidates running away, giving a potential sort of scope to a red wave, it was a lot of the partisan pollsters, including ones like Trafalgar, that seemed to be overestimating Republican support. What do you make of the fact that it seems that the media-backed polls, the public polling, was better than the partisan and private polling?
Well, I think and this has always happened, but they tended to be particularly effective this time. People use polls for partisan reasons. They ask their questions in a certain way to get a certain, response from the voters, and then they leak those polls or publish those polls to create a sense of momentum. So the Republicans did a very good job in the last 2 weeks convincing people that this was going to be a landslide. I resisted this through much of my writing about this as a political scientist. I resisted this line of thought, but I'll tell you, I started to wonder too at the end. I was always arguing that abortion was going to be a more powerful driver of the vote than inflation. And even I started to wonder at the end because of the barrage of polling and averages of polls, et cetera.
So after this election cycle, Elaine, what do you expect happens next with abortion as an issue? Obviously, it was on the ballot in some states, but there are a lack of protections in a lot of states. So what's its potency heading into 2024 and beyond?
Well, I'll tell you, clearly the abortion rights people, the pro-choice people, are going to use the referendum every place they can. Every place they can get a referenda on the ballot, it's going on the ballot. Because right now there have been 6 referenda, and every single one has passed, including in very deep red conservative states like Kansas, where it passed by 20 points, and Montana, where it just passed, and Kentucky, where it just passed. So I think that we are on our way to having the states undo what the Supreme Court did, or redo what the Supreme Court undid. And what happened with gay marriage and other things is that when there's a certain momentum in the states, then the Congress tends to follow. So my guess is, regardless of what the court does, this could be undone within the next 4 years.
Elaine, an issue that hasn't got a lot of coverage is that of COVID. A couple of Republicans, Ron DeSantis in Florida, Brian Kemp in Georgia, made a virtue of their resisting federal mandates for masks and vaccines and holding back on lockdowns through the pandemic. The Biden administration didn't really run on its positive achievements on COVID. So where does that all tell you COVID is up to among the American population and as a political issue?
I think Democrats didn't take that bait because A, there was nothing they could do about it. And B, I'm not sure it was a very effective critique on the Republican part, mostly because it's over. There were people who were really, really mad about the restrictions during COVID and saw it as an issue of individual freedom and choice. What a problem that was, right? If you're going to take away individual freedom and choice on the abortion issue, but you want to argue for it on the issue of the pandemic, you're kind of in a spot, aren't you? And I think that's one of the things that kept it from being as prominent an issue as maybe it could have been.
Looking ahead to the possible competitive Republican primary and even a possible Democratic primary that could be contested, depending on what Joe Biden does, what do you think are the issues that are likely to define those races?
Well, it's hard to say what the key issues are going to be, especially because today the inflation rate dropped to 7.7%. It was the biggest drop we've seen month to month in a long time. So, who knows if inflation will still be an issue by the time of the presidential election. I would say there are 2 ways to look forward to a presidential election. One is at the individual players. And I'd say that Donald Trump has had a very bad night on top of a very bad year. He is being sued and pursued all over the place, from New York to Georgia. He's under enormous legal jeopardy all over the place. So Trump has been damaged. Biden, I think, has been validated. Okay. He still has his problems, but at least he didn't preside over a red wave, as was predicted. So I think he's relatively stronger, should he want to run. So there's the question. And then, of course, we have DeSantis. We have a real challenger to Trump for the first time, who had a very good election night, in spite of the Republicans generally not having a good election night. There was a beautiful tableau, if your viewers have seen it, of him and his very attractive wife and their 3 little children on election night. It was, obviously sort of Kennedy-esque in its looks, and so I think he's a very strong competitor to Trump, and he looks like he's running. That's for sure. The second piece of this is much less personal and much more straight political science. It looks like we have 3 states, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, that are really on the verge of being truly purple competitive states, and they've moved away from being red states, mostly having to do not with any of the politics stuff, but mostly having to do with in-migration. Nevada and Arizona have had Californians coming there for jobs and lower housing. Atlanta is practically an international city. It's not, it's not London or Paris, but it's getting up there, and lots of new people coming in. And those people bring their partisan attachments with them. So if you're looking to 2024 and you're looking at the Electoral College map, it's a different map. It's a different and a much more positive map for the Democrats, even if in these 3 states, the Senate candidates who are currently neck and neck, even if they lose, they're losing by very, very small margins. And it's clear that these states are now competitive. And that was really not the case in the last decade or so.
Elaine Kamarck, we always value your analysis and insights. Thank you very much for being with us on Planet America.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're just about out of time. Any final observations or predictions from you this time?
I think I've talked enough, and I've definitely made enough predictions.
Yeah?
I'm still hurting from the election prediction.
Yeah. I kept that Rick Perry sticker on my laptop for many years to remind myself not to make predictions.
Yeah. That my election prediction goes right next to my Marco Rubio prediction for 2016. Never leave that down.
We should have a disclaimer at the end of every show. Believe the information, not the predictions as to what's not happened yet.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for watching Off the Planet. As we said, on Wednesday night on ABC News, if Trump declares, or even if he comes just very close to declaring and then kind of just teases and scribs, we'll probably do a bonus program in any event, so keep an eye out for that. You'll always find it or anything else that we've done on iView, YouTube and Facebook. Otherwise, we will see you back on Monday of next week for what is going to be the final show of 2022, Chaz.
And almost the final pet podcast as well, which is coming on Friday. Not the final one, that's the second final one. And
An ultimate podcast.
Yeah, well, you can find it in all the all the usual pet places, and you can decide for yourself. See you then.
Bye now.
Bye.